I try to keep a slightly fungal soil for all my crops. I don't bother with rotations. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff that organic, orthodoxy suggests that I don't think is absolutely necessary. I'll just touch on rotations because that's the only thing I like to bring up, and I haven't. It's on the agenda, so just while the moment strikes me. People know about rotating crops for the idea, right? That you want to, prevent pest pressure or disease pressure. I remember as a kid, we lived on a dirt road. It's now paved, but it was definitely a dirt road then. It was almost impassable dirt road. And there was an old hayfield. So it was an old haying road, basically. It was only used by the tractors when they were haying. And other than that, there was no houses on it. And we had fields over here, we had fields over there. And we would rotate our potatoes from that end of that field across the street to that end of that field. And it would take about 2 to 3 days after the potatoes germinated, before the potato beetles were crawling all over them. There was no potato beetles anywhere on the road, on the other crops. They had all moved from there to there. Has anybody ever noticed that happening with potato bugs? Doesn't matter where you put your, summer squash and zucchini. That's powdery mildew finds it just about every year. Flea beetles, you can rotate to your heart's content, and the flea beetles are going to find the brassicas. So for me, this whole concept of rotations, I think, is flawed. I think it's coming more out of a fear matrix than a sort of an empowerment matrix. The idea is that you want to prevent your soils from building up disease pressure and pest pressure by not draining it the same way every year. You can slowly drain your soil by having the brassicas there only every 3 years, or your potatoes every 3 years, but the idea is that your crops take stuff out, and they get sick, and then those diseases are present, and you want to move the crop so that they don't get diseased next year. My sort of alternate proposal is that if you create an environment where the plant is healthy, you have a baseline level of nutrition where that plant can flourish, and that plant is functionally establishing its gut flora in this soil. I don't know why I should rotate.
I always thought it was because the different plants pull different nutrients out of it.
They say different plants pull different nutrients,
Okay,
but
so-
also they say that once you've got Phytophthora in the soil, you want to break the cycle, because then next year you're going to lose your crops to Phytophthora. Because you're afraid of the pathogen, and you're afraid of potato bugs, and you're afraid of this and afraid of that. So, for me, it's been a question of, well, if I take my power and I create an environment where the plants are flourishing, then I shouldn't be afraid of these things. I did a little experiment with late blight when that first came out. You remember first late blight 2009, I think it was, when it first hit, people were running around in a tizzy about their tomato plants, and everybody's tomato plants were dying, their tobacco was dying, and their potatoes were dying, everything in the Solanaceous family was dying. And I was at the Nova Summer Conference in August. I was on a panel with Paul Stamets and somebody from UMass, and I think somebody from New York. And we were all giving our own perspectives on what people should do about late blight. And I had my little 10 minutes was I had a picture of my tomato plants. I'm like, here are my tomato plants, guys. They're all green. Took a picture yesterday. You don't need to be afraid of these things. It's a symptom of an underlying imbalance. That spring was very cold, was very wet, was very cloudy. It rained, and there was no sunlight. So when there's no sunlight and it rains, the plants can't make sugar. They can't feed the soil life. And when it rains and rains and rains, whatever nutrition is available in the soil gets leached out. So when you're leaching out nutrition, when you're getting drained, it's just constantly flowing through you. If you were an animal, what would that be called?
Diarrhea?
What's that?
Diarrhea?
I call it diarrhea. I call it a bad case of diarrhea. Giardia. Right?
Cholera.
And what do you do for that? And there's a little 10-cent packet that's saved, hundreds of thousands of people's lives.
Electrolytes?
Ammonium?
It's sugar and salt. Electrolytes.
Electro.
It's sugar and salt, right? I mean, simple sugar and salt is all it takes to cure a 4-year-old in Africa from cholera and keep them from dying. And that's exactly what I did to my tomato plants was a little bit of molasses and a little bit of seawater. And anybody who was asking me what they should do, I told them the same thing. And all their tomatoes were just fine also. That fall, it was, I don't know, second week in October or so. It was starting to get pretty cold, like down into the mid-30s. Tomato plants were obviously not happy. I did get late blight at that point. I mean, my tomato plants did get the blight, and they got, all the symptoms of melting away and stuff. I took those tomato plants and I put them all in my hoop house because I wanted to give my plants late blight next year to prove that one need not be afraid of such things. So I, planted my salad greens in the hoop house, grew them through the winter, picked them in the spring, and then when it came time to put the tomatoes in, I put my tomato seedlings into that hoop house with the late blight, and then I didn't water them, and I waited for like 3 or 4 weeks until I had a good healthy case of late blight. Like every 8 or 10 plants was dead, and every 3rd or 4th plant had an arm falling off, a leaf falling off. I stressed them out. My objective was to stress them out so they got sick, so that I could then heal them, which I did. I watered them. I drenched them. I put some minerals into my irrigation line. I foliar sprayed them, and then I got out the big guns and gave them some essential oils, some like clove oil and lemongrass and like that. So it took about 10 days to stop the late blight in its tracks. There's YouTubes of me in that hoop house 3 months later showing people how to do a conductivity reading and a Brix reading. And you can see green leaves from the bottom to the top in those plants. I don't think we need to be afraid of diseases. I don't think we need to be afraid of insects. I think they are symptoms of an underlying weakness. And if we take control of the situation and create a healthy environment, these things should be more sustainably addressed.